More complicated because we're going to beam you over to Oxford, I think, for the start of the next presentation. So we're talking about GameChange VR for our next one. This is quite a complicated session. We're going to have a presentation live from Sinead, and then we're going to have a demonstration by some of the team here in Manchester live in front for you. So online we have Sinead Lambe, who's a research psychologist at the University of Oxford, and she's working on the GameChange programme, and she's going to introduce the topic to us. And then in the demonstration we've got Heather, who's our service user, or one of our service user researchers in Manchester, and she's very strong on its service user research contingent and cohort. So she's going to be here together with Kate and Kichau, who are peer support workers in one of the teams as well. And John Sainsbury is going to take part in this session as well. So over to you, I think, Sinead. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. And see the slides all right. Is that all working okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm really sorry not to be there in person today, which looks like a great event. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work on the GameChange project. GameChange was a 3-year project. It was funded by the NIHR project grant, and it was led by Professor Daniel Freeman, who's based here in Oxford, but really was a collaboration between about 15 different organisations, and I think it had about 100 different people working on the project at different time points. And really the overall aim for GameChange was to try and transform mental health services for people with psychosis, so increasing access to powerful and effective psychological treatments, and through the use of automating psychological therapy through VR. So I guess a more kind of straightforward way of saying that, or how we used to talk to patients about it, was that what we wanted to do was to use a VR therapy that was going to help people with psychosis feel more confident, feel safer, more in control when they were going into everyday situations, and to develop it in such a way that it could be scaled up within NHS services. So I'm going to talk you through kind of the process of developing GameChange therapy, and we kind of had 3 stages in that. So we started out with actually identifying what was our treatment target. So what was it that we wanted this treatment to address, and what were the kind of psychological principles or the therapeutic mechanisms that would be important to embed in a virtual reality tool. The second stage is translating that. So if you might have treatment principles that you know are effective, but how do you actually translate that into a virtual environment that's going to be engaging for people, that's actually meaningful for the people that are going to be using it. And so for that, we used a collaborative design approach with lots of lived experience involvement. And then finally, you want to know that the treatment that you've created, although very jazzy and like VR is a very exciting kind of technology, but you want to know that this actually works for people, that it is an effective treatment, and that you're getting the clinical gains that you would expect. And so the final stage was doing some rigorous clinical testing, so through a randomized control trial. So I'll just talk you through each of those kind of 3 steps, and introduction into what GameChange is like, but I believe Heather's going to be demoing it a bit with people as well, so hopefully you'll also get to maybe give it a try. So, treatment target. I think sometimes with some of these problems it's best to start with the voices of people who are actually experiencing it. So GameChange is targeting agoraphobic avoidance, that's an anxiety going outside. And here's just some descriptions of how it was affecting people who took part. So it was really difficult to even go out the front door. I was having massive anxiety attacks. Anywhere crowded, I felt people were staring at me, that they could tell I was mentally ill. If I went shopping with my girlfriend, I would just sit in the car. Often I couldn't even do that. I was in a bad way. As somebody else described, I was very wary about going into certain situations, going into crowded places, cafes, buses, anywhere where there were a lot of people. I was very suspicious of people. I was always worried they were there to harm me. I avoided people as much as possible. It was very isolating. Some people here are describing as agoraphobic avoidance, that kind of difficulty getting outside the front door. And obviously, if you can't get outside the front door, that kind of stops you from pursuing lots of different kind of enjoyable activities in life. And unfortunately, they're not, it's not a rare experience for people with psychosis. So in a survey of nearly 2,000 people who had psychosis and were using NHS services, 2/3 of people have agoraphobic avoidance levels that's comparable to a diagnosis of agoraphobia. So it's quite a common problem. How do we kind of understand it? So we come from a kind of CBT approach, and in some ways it's quite a simple formulation for agoraphobic avoidance, but effectively people are, when they are faced with going outside, they have fears about what's going to happen when they're out there. And so they might be afraid of people judging them, symptoms, worries about what will happen with voices, being attacked by others. And it's those beliefs about that something bad is going to happen that activates an anxiety response, and then to manage that, people avoid. And in the short term, that helps your anxiety come down. What it means is those fear beliefs just persist. People never get an opportunity to find out that they're maybe safer than they believe. And when we look at people with psychosis, the types of worries that they have when they go out are things like, probably some of us could relate to some of these, but worries about being judged negatively, fears about panic, that others would watch them or that they'd fail. So not necessarily psychosis specific. But then there were also worries about, more kind of psychosis specific, that others might harm them, or that they'll struggle with voices. And in response to these, people put up defences. So they isolate themselves from others to keep themselves safe. And when they do have to leave the house, they do a bunch of behaviours to try and minimise the risk of these bad things happening. So to stop themselves being attacked, to stop themselves being judged by other people. So they'll maybe avoid eye contact with other people, they'll do everything as quickly as possible, get back home, leave the situation if they get any kind of sense of danger. And again, the problem with this is that they're not getting opportunities to find out that maybe they're much more capable than they think, or people will be kinder or nicer, or actually just not even notice them that much. So what we want to do in therapy really is that we want people to just drop these defences and start exploring and engaging with their environment in a different way, so that they get an opportunity to update those fears and kind of build up new memories. So that's, this is quite a proven technique within CBT. So what you want people to do is actually go into the situations they normally avoid, drop all their defense behaviors, really engage, and then they build up positive memories of coping and things going well. This is quite a time-intensive therapy to do, so if you're actually going out with people into the real world, it can be hard to know what's going to happen, how busy it's going to be, trying to kind of control those elements. So there's a lot of advantages to doing this in a virtual environment. And one of the main ones really is that people are much more willing to do things in a VR environment because they know it's not real. So a lot of the people we work with are really terrified going into these situations. It's a really high demand that we're putting on them, asking them to go into feared situations. And actually VR, because they know it's not real, you can get a level of engagement quicker. You can also gamify VR, you can make it a bit more fun, a bit more engaging, than maybe doing this kind of work in real life. And then probably one of the key ones for GameChange in terms of advantages is that you can embed a virtual coach who delivers some of the psychological therapy, which means that you could have the treatment supported by peer support workers, assistant psychologists, or a range of different staff rather than just CBT therapists, which means that we can maybe increase access to this much more than if it's a psychological therapy dependent on trained therapists. I think there is a special kind of rage that people experience when technology doesn't work the way that you want it to, doesn't fit with kind of what your needs or functions are, so when you're translating, although we have quite solid psychological principles that we're embedding in the treatment, actually how you translate that into a piece of tech is really important, so that, to minimize rage. So the approach that was taken was a collaborative design approach, so really bringing together different groups and thinking about end users in how we design this. So we started off with the design briefs. There was obviously some parameters about what we could do and had the time and resource. So we wanted to create 3 hours of novel VR experience. We wanted great levels of difficulty that people could progress through. And we wanted opportunities for them to drop defenses and test out their fear beliefs. And we were going to automate it with their coach. So we brought together expertise from lots of different areas. So we worked with the McPinn Foundation, who coordinated all our PPI inputs. We had the Royal College of Art and Design, who actually ran the design workshops and produced designs. We had a commercial partner, which was Oxford VR, and they were a commercial spin-out from Oxford, and they actually programmed GameChange. And then the kind of psychological, clinical expertise came in from Oxford, and also we ran the trial. And we used a person-centered design approach, and you've probably heard kind of about this already through some of the other treatments that have been discussed this morning. But really what this means is that you place people with lived experience kind of as central to every single decision, and you do that from the absolute beginning of the treatment development and design. So for GameChange, that meant that, you know, we had people with lived experience choosing actually what are the scenarios that are important, you know, what are the everyday places that are meaningful and they would like to be able to kind of get back to. What are the things about those environments that are difficult? What are the tasks that are the demands that are put on you when you're in those environments that make them challenging? We had people testing prototypes then as we developed those, and then doing user testing. So that was so that we ultimately knew that it was an easy to use kind of program. Altogether, and this was because it was very well funded, I think, as well, which is an important part of having the PPI involvement in the design process. We had over 100 people with lived experience of psychosis and agoraphobia input into the design, and they inputted over 500 hours. So really substantial contribution. And they did things like, so people would choose reference images of what they imagined to say a GP surgery, what that actually looks like. Then drawings were done up. Somebody would make a grey box version of that in VR, and then when we were kind of happy with that, then adding textures and things. And then these are the types of tasks that people said were kind of important when they're in those scenarios. This is what makes it challenging. So if you're in a cafe, it's difficult having a queue behind you, feeling trapped, having to order in front of people. Throughout the kind of design and development process, we had then success criteria that told us, okay, this build is ready to go. So we wanted people to say that it was easy to use, that it was accessible, that it was engaging, and that they had a strong sense of presence. So they actually felt like they were genuinely there. And so we would run those periodically until we kind of hit that success criteria that people were finding it easy to use, getting that sense of presence. And GameChange was also, we got it CE marked as a Class 1 medical device ahead of the trial. So, what did the treatment actually end up looking like? So, for GameChange, it's a 6-session therapy. It was about 30 minutes in VR per session. It was designed so it can be delivered at home, or it can be in an NHS setting. And it can be supported, as I said, by different members of staff, so peer support workers, assistant psychologists, or therapists. And then each session there's some home practice set, so people can translate some of their learning in VR into the real world. When you put on the headset, the first thing that happens is you meet me. Should work out.
Welcome to GameChange. I'm Nick. I'll be guiding you through the programme. It's great to meet you. The activities you'll try in GameChange are all designed to help you feel more confident, safer and in control around other people. Before we get started, let's introduce you to the virtual world.
So then people would rate their confidence. and choose what scenario they'd like to go to. So there were 6 different scenarios in GameChange. A street, a bus, a cafe, a GP waiting room, a corner shop, and of course the pub. And then within these, there were 5 levels of difficulty. So you start off with somewhere that's quite quiet, maybe not too many people, and then that would build up, it would get busier, and the tasks would be a bit more challenging. And as I mentioned, what we want is people kind of letting their guard down, dropping their defences. And what a lot of people do, for example, might be being really hyper-vigilant, so kind of try to monitor everybody that's in a particular scene. So then the tasks that were in GameChange would kind of force people nearly to let their guard down. So for example, to kind of combat hypervigilance, people would have to clean a wall. So they'd have people walking past them, but they'd have to clean a wall, stand their back to the street.
Fantastic.
And so they wouldn't be able to see what's kind of going on, wouldn't be able to stay hypervigilant and test out that actually they could be safe even when they're not monitoring the scene. And then at the end, they'd re-rate their confidence. So that would be kind of a typical session. The clinical testing, so that's the program that we took to trial. And the trial results were published in 2022 in the Lancet Psychiatry. And it was a clinical trial. We had, so I think it's been the largest VR RCT done so far. And we had 346 patients with psychosis, either effective or non-effective, who self-reported having agoraphobic avoidance. And they were randomized to either receive treatment as usual or treatment as usual alongside VR. And it was run in 5 different sites within the UK, and you can see those on the map, including Manchester. And then people were assessed in terms of their level of avoidance and distress at 6 weeks and 26 weeks. And the trial was designed to answer 3 questions. So we wanted to know, actually, does this work? If it works, how does it work? So is it working on the mechanisms that we have planned? And then who does it work for? So who gains the most benefit from this treatment? So in terms of the first question, does it work? The answer was yes. So we did have an effective reduction in avoidance and distress. But the effect sizes were small, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The second question, which is, how does it work? So is it working as we expect? So we did a mediation analysis. So that was to see, is the outcome predicted by a reduction in those fear cognitions that we spoke about, and a reduction in people's use of defense behaviors, and that's what we saw. So the change was mediated by a reduction, so people had less fearful beliefs and were using less defenses after the treatment. And then finally, who does it work for? And this is a bit I think that's particularly kind of interesting and relevant thinking about future implementation. So the people with high avoidance and severe avoidance, so kind of the ones who struggled with this difficulty the most, were the ones who gained the greatest benefit. So we saw a large effect size at 6 months for the kind of severe avoidance group, so they were gaining the most benefit. And there were secondary effects of that as well, so reductions in paranoia, in worries, and an improvement in quality of life, and these were all maintained in the sphere group at 26-week follow-up. Obviously, figures can sometimes be a bit dry, so to bring this to life, I'm just going to end by showing a video of somebody who took part, who had quite significant difficulties but made great gains through the treatment.
Before we started therapy, I was avoiding going out a lot, and to the extent where I was running out of food. I didn't want to go to the shops because I didn't want to experience what I'd experienced before that. Some panic attacks sometimes, and I was always worried that that was going to happen. Quite a few occasions I would manage to get to the shops after several days, but perhaps not make it in and go home before I completed whatever it was that I'd set out to do. The first VR session was the that's the most interesting probably, because it was the first time I'd experienced anything like it, and it is quite unlike anything I'd experienced before. I put the headset on, and I was sort of instantly completely immersed in a different situation. I didn't expect to feel anxious in those situations, but I did, and that was actually a huge surprise, that they were realistic enough to actually sort of provoke or stimulate an anxiety response. But that was fantastic because I was able to we talked through it. There was a GP surgery scenario, which I did a few times, and that was really, really useful. Although I didn't go to the GP, I did go to a pharmacist, and the setup was very similar. It's kind of like relearning confidence almost a little bit as well, and putting memories of situations that are good and okay and just normal into my memory bank, rather than the awful things that I was imagining were going to happen. That's something that's quite different after therapy, is that rather than avoiding situations or leaving and going home or escaping to a bathroom or something, I've been able to stick it out and found that I can do it. I'm not going to pass out, and nothing terrible is going to happen. I'm just going to be standing in a queue or whatever it is for a few minutes. Since the therapy, I've managed to book onto some courses, which started off online and are now in person, which I'm going to. That was unthinkable a year ago. I wouldn't have thought that I was able to do it at all. But I'm going and I'm enjoying it. I'm still getting quite nervous beforehand, but I'm still doing it. I'm still going, and that's a big difference rather than backing out of it and committing to something I'm really trying to get at. And therapy's helped hugely with that. I'd encourage anybody to do it. I had a great experience. My life has changed for the better quite considerably since I did it. So I would very much recommend anybody with anxiety to give it a go. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I went and bought a headset, a VR headset, to play with on my own at home, which took me quite a bit off.
Great. So I've left my email address there, so if anybody does have any questions that don't get answered by the rest of the kind of GameChange team that are talking today, please do drop me a line, and I'm very happy to get back to you.
Thanks very much, Sinead.
Thanks for the slot. I was asked by Tony Morrison to support the real-world pilot of GameChange into GMMH. I'm going to do a quick run-through of that now. First, I'll talk about S-curves. So S-curves are used, they're found in biology and economics and engineering by researchers who are identifying improvements over time across different systems. And we can think about, the Model T Ford all the way up to the Tesla. There won't just be 3 S-curve jumps. There'll be many hundreds, if not thousands or millions of jumps to get to those changes. The innovator space happens between the S-curves, in that gap, that leap between one way of doing something and the next. I'm going to annotate this speech using that approach. I'm just trying to get my timer. What we have here is S-curves mapped against Joseph Campbell's Hero of 1,000 Faces, where Professor Darrell Mann, has shown the innovator's journey. I'm going to use this to annotate this talk. I'll just give you a minute to read that, if you can see it. The challenge happens in the middle, and the emphasis will be there. So 4 or 5 years ago, Tony Morrison approached me and asked me to get involved in GameChange in the RCT. And I said, I work in innovation, I'm real world. This is research, not really for me. Little did I know about the pipeline from research that we've heard about today to kind of real world innovation and treatment in the NHS. So I refused that initial call. And then I met the mentor. And the mentor came in the form of Oxford VR and Oxford Health's service blueprint for the fear of heights. So that's VR for the fear of heights, which was really helpful, providing a step-by-step guide to running a virtual reality implementation within an NHS setting. I couldn't say it was paint by numbers, but it was helpful to have some sort of guide. You can't run implementation in the NHS through a checklist, but I do really like a checklist. The next mentor we came across was Liz Murphy. So Liz Murphy was the trial coordinator in Manchester. She has kind of vast experience as a trial therapist. She was also supportive of the therapists in the trial, but then also came across into the real world pilot. And with fidelity to the RCT training modules, she then supported the staff who were trained to become VR facilitators in the real world. And she also habituated kind of jobbing clinicians to using outcome measures, which psychologists do, but not everybody uses outcome measures routinely. And that's been really helpful for us to have some real world data. And in this sense, it was the Oxford agoraphobia scale. So this is leadership in the pilot that's been really instrumental, but it's also a good example of the co-location of research and innovation in Greater Manchester mental health, where that knowledge transfer from research can come across into the real world setting. As we move through the kind of the S curves and the hero's journey, we cross the threshold. Liz and that kind of blueprint really helped to put together a proof of concept document, to articulate the reason for giving this a go, to identify funding and getting support from leaders and from R&I execs. The emphasis of this presentation will be really on the adopter system in the healthcare organisation. Sinead has talked about the condition, agoraphobia, within psychosis. She's talked about the technology and its development and the value proposition, that it could actually change people's lives and give them greater confidence, reduce their distress, and help them to change their thinking patterns and their emotional responses to experiences that cause them fear. So the focus, as I said, will be on the adopter system, on the staff, on the training within the healthcare environment, the NHS trust that we work for. The test, friends and challenges stage of the journey was really governance. So clinical safety cases, data protection impact assessments, regulatory steps. It was already registered, as was heard from Sinead, as a medical device, so we had to register that within the trust. There were all sorts of workshops that we had to do with staff to mitigate risks that might emerge during this pilot. Because it was new to our scenario, we had to check it out with our staff. So that took about 6 months. That was a bit of a shock to the researchers who are very, can move to some degree at pace and are in a kind of protected bubble. When we enter the real world, we're actually interfacing with a complex organisation. I'm not undermining the governance and the ethical approval that researchers have to go to. That is kind of no easy feat. But the real challenge, I would say, so the friends first were the IM&T colleagues who signed off our approvals, research leads, and operational managers who thought, let's give this a go. This is new, let's have a look at this. But also the clinical teams who thought, actually, we're struggling, but this is something novel, we've got some patients like this, let's see what we can do. So there was an appetite to learn, there was an openness, and that was really helpful. And the challenges were identifying the right people who were open to receiving GameChange. And Sinead mentioned the literature that was undertaken where 2,000 patients with psychosis were identified, and of those, like a third, 2/3, so up to 70% of them had that diagnosis of agoraphobia and psychosis. In the real world, in the electronic patient record, we found only 0.7% had that co-identified in their diagnostic labelling within the electronic patient record as having both psychosis and agoraphobia. So the record didn't help us. It's not necessarily that those people aren't there or the literature's wrong. It's actually, are we knowing? Are we identifying those people? Are the screens in place? Is it being recorded accurately? There's a whole bunch of factors that are kind of reducing the visibility of those people. So the real challenge then was this kind of finding the right people. How can we get this technology? How can we get this treatment to these people in the right way at the right time? So partway through the pilot, we kind of had this ordeal really. We were struggling to find people. We really want to make this work. So there were two things that we tried. One was the direct contact approach, where we went to care coordinators and asked, rather than who should we contact, who shouldn't we contact? And we just got this list, and we then approached them directly through phone calls, through emails, and we had a list of 38 that we tested. Of those, we had 2 patients that received GameChange. So that's 0.5, it's only 5% actually, 5% success rate. So the direct from an unknown person contacting service users in our situation wasn't really fruitful. We then tried another approach, which was our mental health wellbeing practitioners approach care coordinators. Now I know there's Bilbo Baggins and the Dragon Eye. I'm not really comparing care coordinators to dragons. They're incredibly kind, hard-working individuals, but they're super busy. And for a junior member of staff to approach somebody who's super busy and ask them for help and say, could you just give me 5 minutes? And what they did is they used MAST, a kind of AI-driven algorithm tool which presents case loads in a visual dashboard that can be filtered according to a whole range of factors, and they found by psychosis, by member of staff. Can I just run through your list of people with psychosis? Of these, can I just ask you questions? Who is afraid of leaving the house? Quickly, take you 5 minutes, those people. And through that they generated a list. That was incredibly fruitful. Within one session, 6 people were identified. So using that kind of technology to identify the cohort was really fruitful. And we progressed. And so we moved through the ordeal, we started to identify suitable people. And so what we had was 43 people who were deemed as suitable. And actually that number 43, by complete coincidence, is 0.7 of the people with psychosis, which matches against the EPR record. We weren't using that entire EPR data set, that was shared with clinicians, but it's a similar number. So this is 0.7 of the people with psychosis on that caseload. I'll run to the bottom line. So eventually we had 25 people who had more than one session that we had some data on, with 5 who were then accessible for follow-up. We lost lots of people to follow-up, not through any harm or anything, but just they were hard to contact and for us to undertake those measures with. And then we've plotted in the dotted line is the published GameChange evidence that Sinead has already presented against our real-world pilot. And this is the distress score, which I think GameChange has had the most impact on. Of course, the numbers are small, so we can't really make any definitive claims about this, but there's just some similar downward trends in distress. Again, GameChange pilot is in green and the RCT in the dotted line. And this is the avoidance score. So you can see there's a parallel reduction in avoidance through the pilot, which is really nice to see. And then for those 5 people, so don't make any conclusions from small numbers, there's 5 people we can see on the distress score on the left-hand side, a significant reduction, as well as on the avoidance score, with distress in the red line and avoidance in the blue. Damien's given me time, so be pleased that I'm almost there. So the reward is, well, basically we discovered that peer mentors, people trained who have had experience of psychosis, trained, supported, supervised, working effectively as GameChange facilitators within an MDT has been a really wonderful learning experience for them, and they're going to talk in a few minutes, but also they've been able to treat more people than teams where the practitioner has been embedded and have already got a day job, and GameChange has been shoehorned into their day job as another therapy for them to do. So the peer mentors have been really successful. But also the experience, after a while, we were pushing the technology for many, many months. And after a while, there's a moment of truth in the supervision session where the practitioners were talking back to us. They were like, I've got this person, I've done some GameChange, and they're really struggling. What should I do next? And they were engaged with it. The staff were engaged, the clients were engaged, and people were starting to move on. And the co-location of an STR worker in the real world and a GameChange facilitator at home really empowered that progress of somebody testing their fears in the real world. In terms of satisfaction, it was, of the 14 results that we've got, everybody was satisfied. We discovered that some gamers weren't too happy with it because they didn't have the presence or the salience within the, they didn't believe it, they didn't get the fear, so it didn't really have that therapeutic benefit. We had one adverse event, and that was in the case of somebody who had derealisation prior to GameChange, and GameChange unsettled them and affected their derealisation experiences. So from that, it was built into our risk strategy, we trained our staff accordingly, and derealisation was then not avoidance, but we just had to be careful, and there had to be an MDT, a discussion around such people. Eventually, one of the rewards is that GameChange, and Sinead didn't mention it, has, as Avatar has, received a nice early value assessment, positive assessment that it can be used in the real world. So that brings us to the close really. We're now returning to the real world with GameChange. Can we implement it? Can it be scaled? I think the jury's out really. We're hoping to continue this pilot and strengthen it across the country to give more people the opportunity to benefit from it. And so in terms of sharing it with the real world, here we are today. This is part of sharing GameChange and other XR therapeutics with the world in terms of spreading the word and hopefully embedding them into clinical practice. Now, I don't think I'm due any applause, but the applause is for the people in the audience who I'd like to maybe put your hand up, you don't have to stand up, if you've been involved in GameChange in Greater Manchester Mental Health, you've done the hard work, you've done the heavy lifting, please raise your hand and the applause is yours.
Hi, so I just wanted to chat a little bit about a service user perspective on GameChange. So I'm a service user researcher based over at the Psychosis Research Unit. I've been involved with GameChange since almost the beginning. So it was the largest clinical trial of VR for mental health at the time. I don't know if that's changed, but Sinead kind of suggested that it hasn't. At the time, I helped to coordinate PPI workshops for Manchester and supported Mindtech and the Royal College of Arts to do those workshops. And also McPinn, who's so it's like championing the PPI involvement within research to support with the wording of the therapist within the programme. So they come up with some things that the therapist might say, they came up with environments that could be used, and also Mindtech was involved and they came up with the idea that a peer support worker would deliver the intervention and that would be a really good idea. And so the VR therapy was really a user-centered design. At the time, I promoted that and did a launch event and helped to raise awareness within early intervention teams and community mental health teams and did a number of presentations. This is the first presentation I've done since before lockdown and I'm feeling it anxiously. But I did a number of presentations at the time and I think you kind of get used to it then. So yeah, within lockdown, we stopped with the delivery of VR. And I actually thought that I might not deliver VR again, but then in November, when people were still working from home, I went in and delivered it in full PPE, which was massively complex. The technology was different to what we're using now. We had to clean it all down with all the wipes, and to be honest, it felt quite hard, but we still did it. And then as time went by, it just got a little bit easier, to be honest. At that time, I was also my first trimester, so that was another challenge for me. But then, by the time I was back from maternity leave, John and Liz had developed the pilot study, so I became an integral part of that as well, which was really exciting, because it was just really nice to be involved still. Even though I'd had such a long break, I could still use the skills that I'd developed. So I helped to write the SOPs and side effects leaflet. We did the side effects leaflet based on the satisfaction paper from the RCT, looking at what was happening in the room. That was something that people were concerned about. The headset inducing panic, and then worries which might remain after the session. So we were aware of that, used the grounding techniques that John's already mentioned, and just asked questions to people and made sure that, you know, they were comfortable while we were there. I then supported with the delivery of the training when Liz went on maternity leave, and provided mentoring to some of the facilitators, which involved kind of helping with the VR setup, the delivery of GameChange, and then also the measures which were recorded as well. So I provided supervision to peer support workers and STR workers, and also helped John with the group supervision sessions, and have helped with some of the final evaluation as well. And then I did the direct contact approach as well, which was difficult, but I think worth doing to see whether it was fruitful or not. So yeah, just to kind of reflect on what I've learned, it's been really interesting to see the complete research journey running from the RCT through to a full implementation. From what I understand, I don't think many people in research have had that full experience, and it's been really interesting. It's gone from a large team in the RCT to quite a small team within just me, John and Liz, but we've kind of built up on that and had help from other people, so I think it's made it all possible. And what I've enjoyed is the impact of virtual reality on the participants, the excitement from trying it, and the excitement from teams as well. And one of the main things is just offering it as a peer support worker, and the support and hope that hopefully instills on people. I think that can help in their own recovery as well. And that's it, thank you.
So I'd like to invite Kate to come up, and then the other peer mentors, and Rory and the service user.
So as pictured on the screen is a formulation that I worked on with a client, Andrew, through GameChange sessions. So Andrew was a service user at Trafford Early Intervention Team. Andrew experienced depression and paranoia. This led to avoidance in not leaving the house and very low mood. Andrew would experience feelings of depression, which would then lead to specific thoughts. As you can see in the first box, there's am I valued, am I good enough, and that people don't care. This led to paranoia affecting Andrew from feeling able to leave the house. Andrew was worried about what people might think. Using the VR headset meant that we could analyse these thoughts together and understand how defences Andrew had built up could be preventing him from being able to engage in everyday situations. One of Andrew's goals was to develop confidence and how he felt about himself, as he felt this was related to him being able to leave the house. It was useful for us to work on these unhelpful beliefs as part of Andrew's experience of social anxiety. Andrew's defences were avoiding social situations altogether, not speaking much during conversation, scanning faces for judgment or criticism, or avoiding eye contact. The work we did using the VR headset was around building tolerance within particular settings whilst experiencing these feelings. Through reflecting on the work Andrew completed in the VR headset, Andrew developed a technique of responding rationally to paranoid thinking. He learned that even though he may feel self-conscious, others wouldn't be judging him in everyday situations. During the final session, Andrew challenged himself to stand for 10 minutes within a virtual shopping centre, a situation which caused him high anxiety. He was able to stand confidently, noticing people walking by and looking at him and staying calm without having to distract himself with a task or immediately remove the headset. We reflected in sessions on Andrew's capacity to motivate himself and how he feels he can cope with difficult feelings, preventing him from engaging socially. Andrew shared his own mantra, "You'll feel better if you take the first step." Andrew was able to reflect on the paranoid thinking around others he experienced in everyday situations, which the VR settings would provoke, from the safety of his own home. Towards the end of sessions, Andrew was able to go for walks in the park and find this relaxing. He had set this out as an out-of-session task. He was able to visit the shop and not feel that he had to leave as quickly as possible. Andrew felt that he could be kinder to himself and start feeling able to trust others and believe that people can share compassion and kindness towards each other. This was part of Andrew's goal for Game Change in developing more independence and feeling more confident around others. Thank you.
We're really privileged to have Toby, who is using our service and has used the GameChange VR tool, and Kichau, who's our peer support worker who delivered the intervention. And I guess it's ironic that in a high technology day, that the truth is that what's important are the people that are sat here really, and for that reason we don't need any technology other than a microphone, which we haven't got at the moment. So maybe what have we got no mic? I'm Rory Allott, and I'm a clinical psychologist and lead in Trafford Early Intervention team, where we've been doing the majority of the pilots for the GameChange trial. And we just wanted to invite somebody to talk about their experience of VR, but also a peer to just have a quick moment to say what it's like to be a peer in the team and why it's important to be a peer. So, as you can see, for all of us, it's deeply nerve-wracking standing here. But I think I'll start with Toby, yeah? And I had a brief chat with you earlier, so I think you've got some lovely things to share. Why don't you tell us about what things were like before and why you chose to do the VR intervention?
So this time last year, I could not leave my house. I noticed a lot of people mentioning how it's believed experiences. I've sadly had a lot of actual experiences of negative things happening to me outside on public transport. So I had a reinforcement of, don't go outside, this will happen to you. And even though I've been through different talking therapies, nothing has sunk in that's been effective or has helped me process any of that. And it reinforced voices and negative, well, unhelpful behaviours that just kept me inside. And similarly to, I believe a video was shared before, of I didn't need to go to the shop. I was fine, I didn't need food, because I was too scared to go. That was my kind of, I made myself believe I was fine. And I couldn't even, I would try to go outside and it felt like I was being dragged back in because I was so scared.
It's a beautiful way of describing it.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to do the VR? I mean, it seems obvious, but...
I want to become a peer support worker. I understand that my lived experiences and the help that I've received through Greater Manchester Health teams and various support units, I want to be able to help others take that first scary step and go, yeah, the first step is terrifying, and once that's done, kind of like the first scribble on a sketchbook, you can do the rest. It's just having that, I guess, facilitation of, come on, I can do it. It's hard, I'm not going to tell you it's not scary, but we can do it. Things are here to help.
So you needed to do it in order to model that for the future.
Yeah.
And so tell us, specifically, I think going on a bus was important. And you know, I'm standing here thinking, I can't believe you're even stood here in front of all these people. And you have got here today by bus. Specifically, the VR has a bus environment. What was it about doing that allowed you then to go on a bus?
I found the thing that stopped me, I could get to a bus stop, but I couldn't make that transition.
Right.
And the VR facilitated that. So it kind of skipped that wall. And I was like, oh, I've already passed it. Now I just have to cope. And building up that resilience to be like, oh no, this is fine. Nothing bad's happening. And it was okay.
Brilliant.
And even though it's a VR experience, it's a positive experience that I've done, that I could use as evidence to myself. And I thought at first, it's VR, it's not going to work. It's like a video game, it's fine. And the first session was shockingly like reactive. I had to sit with Kichau and Heather for about 20 minutes just to like come down from the anxiety. But then it was like, this is deeply unpleasant. But that means it's working. And
That's a lovely way to put it. That
Yeah.
you're feeling so anxious that it, in some ways, must be effective because it's like the real world.
yeah, my mum's mantra is medicine doesn't have to taste good to still be medicine.
It's a good one.
So I didn't like doing it initially, but it worked.
I don't think I need to ask this question because you stood here, but afterwards, how has it helped? How are things different?
It's given me that evidence to voices, stimuli that I think's happening of like, if you get on a bus, someone's going to punch you or whatever, and be like, no, it didn't happen, and it won't happen, it's fine. And from the end of Game Changer to now, I've challenged myself to get on a bus 2-3 stops every couple of days and just keep trying, because there's no point in me having partaken in Game Changer if I'm not going to use the tool.
That's the deep commitment from you.
Yeah.
How many stops did it take to get in today?
53.
53. So there you go. There's some time, so I am keeping this short, but that was really beautifully short. Why do you think, Kichau, it's important to have peers? Because often these interventions are delivered by people like me, therapists. Yeah. Why have a peer?
Just having a peer is you're with the individual every step of the way through their recovery, and it's we're going like with the people instead of in front or behind, supporting. The Game Change therapy, it's really helped a lot of people over the years with the severe anxiety into everyday situations, and for that I'm really glad to be involved.
Lovely. And I think if I can just have one final word, I think, for career highlights for myself, like being able to have 2 peer mentors employed in the team, have someone who's, recovering, from using VR and now wanting to go on to be a peer mentor. This is why I do this job, so I just I feel really privileged that you both felt prepared to come up and stand here, so thanks.
I think that was so powerful, so interesting in every sense, really. So we do have a few minutes just for any questions or comments from the team here who've so kindly given up their time and opened their feelings to us. Any questions or comments?
I want to commend you all for using having peer support as so integral to the model. I think it's absolutely excellent, and well done guys for all that you've achieved. It's amazing. One of the questions I want to ask, I'm particularly interested in anxiety and agoraphobia as a standalone condition, is about the long-term impacts, and I know this is often an issue in research. Do we know whether the effects are maintained over a period of time? That's question number one. And the second question is about, with agoraphobia, often it's about a distance thing, a distance from a safe place. How is that being looked at in the programme, if indeed it has?
So I could possibly have a go at it, and I think the jury's out, because this is so new. We've seen the Game Changer, the biggest funded VR RCT, and they failed for 28 weeks, 26 weeks, so I think that's as much as we've got in terms of data. I think we have a living representative of at least one anecdote, piece of evidence that, somebody in the room showing that it's been sustained. But I think the jury's out.
One of the options I was given as a VR headset is very portable, but part of my fear was I couldn't stand other people being in my home, because that was my safe haven, that was where I went to be safe away from people. So we had the option to take it to a library, which was the Blue Sky group in Trafford. They had a room set up that Kichau would bring the headset, and I knew that was a safe space as well, but it wasn't so personal like my home. So it was just that little buffer I gave myself of, well, if the game change doesn't work, not the right wording, but the words that come to mind, I've not tainted my home with a bad experience. And so that was at least what I did to be in the library, and that made me feel an extra bit of safety. But also having Kichau there, even though I couldn't see him whilst I was in the VR because there's a virtual coach, I knew he was there anyway, and it just, at least for me personally, gave me that extra level of, I'm terrified, but I know I'm in a safe place. And it's that reinforcement of just, yeah, I've got to just keep remembering Kichau's here, Heather's here, when she can be like, I'm fine. So that was at least how I reinforced it for myself. I don't know about other users, but that's how it worked for me.
I thought it was really interesting, Toby, that you mentioned that you were practicing it, but that's practicing in the real world, if I understood.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, in the video, we saw somebody gone out and bought a headset. So I just wondered whether you ever would feel the need to go back to the VR, or you're happy now that to continue. You know, if you had opportunity to have a VR headset, would you do it more in that, or do you think the real world's now the place to do it?
I think for me, having the VR set as a separate thing, I think for a lot of people, I think it would benefit them to have VR at home, to like keep working on it.
Yeah.
For me, I quite like that separation of, yes, I've done this, I know the tool, I want to put it in practice. And on the other side, the funds to get a VR, not possible for me, so it's always been like, I've never thought of it, because it's not a possibility. But yeah, I think there's a lot of value in, you can give people as many tools as you like and notes, but if you don't act on them, nothing's going to get better. So I just tried to make sure that I had my own safety precautions of, I'm going to get off at this bus stop, someone be there for me, like a friend or family member. But yeah, I've never considered having the VR at home, because it feels like a separate line for me, I guess. I don't know how else to.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
That's great to hear. Yeah, that your experience on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I could add to that, because there is a challenge, isn't there, around the use of VR and people escaping into VR rather than being in the real world, mixed with having the opportunity to use VR as a top-up dose, like in medications like PRN. And in the States, they have done some work with military veterans who have anxiety in association with post-traumatic stress, and they ship the headsets to the vets. And they had remote kind of support, telemedicine support, so not the experience that we provided in GMMH, but somebody on the phone talking them through. The vets, the evidence is not published, but it's anecdotal across scores of vets, is that they find it beneficial to have that top-up dose, experiences of them going on cruises or going to kind of sporting events with their kids that they wouldn't ever have done in the past. And just having the dose of VR, building their confidence before the event, and then going out. So there is that model, and that as we've heard from XR Therapeutics, having it at home in a flexible deployable where that's maybe more kind of scalable in the future. But with that caveat, we don't want people with anxiety to disappear into a virtual reality. We want it as a treatment, as an antidote rather than as a policy.
Thank you very much, John. I'm going to draw us to a close. Could you just join me in thanking Heather, John and the team for their presentation.